It's been 2 weeks with the iPhone 16 Pro and I've got a lot of thoughts to share. I've been extensively using this phone and thoroughly testing every feature, especially the camera, which I've already made a full review on, so feel free to check that out. But today we're gonna talk about all the other aspects, as well as touch on subjects that no other channels have talked about. So let's get started. But before we dive into the details, I just quickly wanted to say that I don't know how Apple does it, but despite it having basically the same design for the last 5 years, every time you unbox a new iPhone, the old one immediately starts to feel ancient. I mean, look at the 14 Pro standing next to it. Those bezels seem massive. The display of a new iPhone is stunning as always, but there's one significant improvement if you're coming from last year's Pro model, which is the ability to go as low as 1 nit. So you will no longer bother your sleeping partner while scrolling through your feed at night. The maximum brightness is still 2000 nit, which you still can't regulate on your own. It will only go as high if the sun is beaming straight onto it, which then will overheat the phone and make it dim the screen. The rest of it is as good as it gets. I don't really feel like I have to tell you how good the display of the iPhone is. You probably already know. However, I have to say there's one more significant improvement if you're like me and coming from an older Pro iPhone, which has to do more with the design than the panel itself. While the display itself is still flat, the edges that are leading up to it are now curved. So while my 14 Pro felt more secure in the hand, this one feels much better to hold in the hand, if that makes sense. Especially combined with the reduced weight due to the titanium chassis, so now your pinky won't hurt after scrolling on Insta for 15 minutes. This alone would be a reason to upgrade for me, not the scrolling on Instagram, but the weight. The 14 Pro was way too heavy. This, combined with the fact that both Pro models this year are identical in terms of feature set and camera system, is also one of the reasons why I got the regular Pro and not the Pro Max. I just don't like the weight of it. And besides that, iOS doesn't let you utilize the bigger screen anyway. The only reason to get the Pro Max would be the battery, which we'll talk about later, but while I like the design changes, it's not all rainbows and sunshine. Usually, I'd say that the build quality is amazing. This is an iPhone after all, at this point it's just expected. But this year, the lock button feels like a cheap knockoff part. Depending on where you're gonna press it, it will either feel firm or soft and mushy with this kind of hollow sound. On my iPhone 14 Pro, for example, it doesn't matter where I press it, it always feels firm. But that's not the case for the 16 Pro. I don't know if it's an issue with my phone or every iPhone 16 model is like this. I'm assuming they're all the same because my girlfriend's iPhone 15 has the same problem. So I'm guessing they just switched to lower quality parts with the iPhone 15, which I don't really understand because with all the engineering on the useless camera control button, you'd think they'd figure out how to make a lock button. It might seem like I'm overblowing it, but the last time I had an issue with the build quality of the iPhone was back in 2011 when the home button got stuck on my iPhone 4. So in my opinion, this is not acceptable on a $1,000 phone. Since I'm coming from the 14 Pro, the action button is new to me, and at first I was kind of excited to have it, especially since you can set self-made shortcuts to it. So in theory, you could literally do anything with it, but I just set it to clock me in and out at work. I mean, it's better than the lock switch, but it's not really that useful unless you have a specific use case for it. A big part of that has to do with the fact that you can set multiple actions to it, like double pressing, for example. I know there's workarounds with the focus mode because you can set it to do specific things in specific focus mode, but I feel like it's too much hassle and iPhones are meant to be easy. So it's not for me. I really don't like to overcomplicate things for no reason. Now, let's talk about the notorious camera control button. Half of the promised features are not even here yet. I guess it's hard to code features for a button. So all it does now is bring up the camera from anywhere in the system and allow you to switch between modes and zoom in. But let's just start by saying this. Everything this button currently does, it does worse than the software-based features. Zooming on the zoom wheel is easier, switching between cameras is easier just by tapping on the screen, and even switching between modes is easier. Even as a two-step shutter button, which is a promised feature that is not even out yet, it would be awful to use because the shutter button is supposed to be soft so you don't press it by accident. accident. And this button is firm all the time, so you end up pressing it by accident all the time. And even if you want to press it, every time you press it to take a picture, you kind of have to press on the phone, so it introduces shake to your pictures. The button is also placed way too high up for it to be used in landscape, and it's too low for portrait. I don't really see a point in this button, so I literally set mine to do nothing upon pressing on it, because otherwise it actually does more harm than good. It randomly opens the camera, takes random pictures, randomly zooms in when you don't want to. So the best thing about this button is that you can just deactivate it. I hope when Apple rolls out the promised features, it's gonna be a bit more useful, although I really struggle to see that. But until then, unfortunately, it's just wasted space. Alright, the cameras. I thought it would be hard to impress me because the 14 Pro that I'm coming from already took insane pictures. But this thing, it takes it up a notch. The addition of the 5x zoom really brings it to a pro level. The main reason for that is previously you would compare it to a real camera because the lenses it had would cover the usual 24-70mm lens that most people have on their mirrorless cameras, but now they has a 120mm lens, which not a lot of hobby photographers have because of weight and cost. It really just complements a real camera instead of trying to go against it. Anytime I need a lens longer than 70mm, I take my iPhone out because I know for a fact it's gonna take a picture that I wouldn't be ashamed of posting or even printing. With that, it also now got a 48MP ultra-wide lens, which takes crisp photos even in low light. I wish they made a 48MP telephoto lens instead, but that's besides the point. And the main camera is almost on the same level as a real camera, especially now that you can shoot both log and RAW. This really feels like a complete camera system, and if you want to know more about all the details, make sure to check my full camera review of the iPhone 16 Pro. I won't be repeating myself in this video, otherwise it's just going to be too long. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The battery life on this phone is insane. And the whole time I was testing this phone, I wasn't able to kill the battery in a day. I have never had that with an iPhone. And keep in mind that the first weeks are the hardest on the battery, since you usually test everything and play with it a lot, but also it does the background stuff after you've moved from an older iPhone and transferred all your data. And still, I never managed to get below 20% battery life. I'll tell you this, when I was testing the camera, I took my 14 Pro with me to compare them against each other. After around 5 hours of non-stop shooting, the 14 Pro gave out, which was expected, but the 16 Pro still had 50% battery life. Now, granted, the 14 Pro had a degraded battery at around 90%, but still, this is an impressive result for the 16 Pro. I can confidently say that the regular Pro this year has Pro Max type battery life, and this is just another reason to get the regular Pro instead of a Pro Max. Also, I had not once managed to overheat this phone, so it seems that Apple's new cooling layout is actually working, which should impact battery life expectancy, besides the fact that it's not going to degrade as fast as on previous models because the battery won't go below 20% as much. So when it comes to the battery, this phone takes a big W. Honestly, if battery is a concern of yours, I'd even upgrade from the 15 Pro, which I would not recommend otherwise. Alright, since Apple Intelligence is not even out yet and it's not really tied to this phone, you can also get it on the 15 Pro, there's barely any reason to talk about it. That being said, iOS 18 has been a mess for me. I really like the customization options that it introduced, but I have experienced so many issues with my iPhone 14 Pro and 16 Pro running iOS 18. The Photos app is a mess, sometimes the phone will just straight up freeze, and I'm not even talking about Apple Intelligence, which isn't even out yet. But at least, unlike previous years, there seem to not be any hardware issues with the iPhone 16 Pro, which I'm glad to see. The only issue that I've run into, which is not really an issue, has to do with the size of the apps. Since the screen of the iPhone has increased from 6.1 to 6.3, the apps still need to adapt to it. So some controls might seem funky, but that will get fixed pretty soon. Other than that, the lock button, I have not experienced any hardware issues. So, should you buy it? If you're coming from a 15 Pro, I'd say it's not worth it, unless you really need the extra battery life. Even from a 14 Pro, to be honest, the jump didn't feel as big as I thought it would. But if you combine better cameras, better battery, and smaller weight, it packs everything most of us need. If you're not sure which iPhone is best for you, I've got a video to help you pick. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it and consider subscribing. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year, and if you subscribe, that would be very helpful. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.